Hello everyone, it's Cam. Welcome to another video. Now today is a very special video because today's quite a special occasion in music. Today marks the 70th birthday, the 70th anniversary of when the charts first were issued here in the UK. And I'm going to go over and show you all my 45 singles and CD singles that I have that reached #1. Now, I don't have every #1, you can't expect to have every #1, but there's some #1s that I am missing from some of the artists I like. But we're just going to carry on anyway, and might not be always 100% accurate with some of the facts, but I'll go ahead with the video anyway. So, the earliest #1 I have is from 1958, and it's the Everly Brothers with All I Have to Do Is Dream. That got to #1 in July of 1958, and was #1 until the August of 1958. So it was #1 for a few weeks. It's a great song. Then Bird Dog by the Everly Brothers. This was #1 I think from the August of 58 until September of 58 for a few weeks. So yeah, it's really nice to have them on. That was the follow-up single. It Doesn't Matter Anymore, Buddy Holly. This got to #1 in 1959. It was a posthumous #1 for Buddy Holly. And the B-side is Raining in My Heart, which is a fantastic song. I could have shown the B-sides as well. B-side for this one is Claudette, and the other side for this one is Bird Dog. No, Devoted to You, sorry. But Raining in My Heart is another fantastic song. I think this might have been a double A-side, but nice to have that one on Coral. 1960, the Everly Brothers were #1 with Kathy's Clown, and it was #1 in the US as well on Warner Brothers, with Always It's You on the other side on Warner Brothers. 1960 saw the first ever UK release of this artist, Roy Orbison, Only the Lonely. This was his first UK #1 in 1960, and Roy would have a further 2 #1s, which we'll touch about later on. But here's his first one, Only the Lonely, from 1960, with Here Comes That Song Again. Now this is my first #1, I think it was the first #1 of the 60s for this artist. I don't have every single by him yet, but I'm working on it, and a lot of his singles would be #1 as well, and that's Elvis Presley, and this is It's Now or Never from 1960. That got to #1. I think it overtook Roy Orbison from #1, and Make Me Know It on the other side on RCA. Walk Right Back, #1 in 1961 on Warner Brothers with Ebony Eyes, so a double A side. That one. Both sides I think made #1 of that record. Then this was the Everly's last UK #1, Temptation, and Stick With Me Baby on the other side. This one is also a double A side, Rockahula Baby, Elvis Presley, 1962, and Can't Help Falling in Love on the other side. I actually prefer this side of the record over the other one, but both good songs, especially this Can't Help Falling in Love, 1962 on RCA. Now, we're going to show the Beatles, finally. Now, there is a popular myth that Please Please Me made #1 because George Martin said, "Congratulations boys, you made your first #1. Well, it depends on what music papers you were buying at the time. I can't remember what one said had Please Please Me #1, but most of the charts, the national charts, had Please Please Me at #2, so that's not here, unfortunately. But the first #1 I do show from the Beatles is From Me to You, 1963, with Thank You Girl. She Loves You by the Beatles in 1963, another #1 with I'll Get You. I Want to Hold Your Hand from #1, 1963, and this was the Christmas #1 on 1963. It was #1 from December 63 until January of 64, so it was #1 during the Christmas period of 63 with This Boy on the Other Side, which is another superb song. Can't Buy Me Love with 1964, and You Can't Do That. And now we have It's Over by Roy Orbison, his second UK #1 in 1964, and this was #1 for 2 weeks in July of 1964, and Indian Wedding on the B-side. It's All Over Now by the Rolling Stones, 1964, and Good Times, Bad Times. And then this next record overtook the Rolling Stones, and no surprise, it's the Beatles with A Hard Day's Night, 1964. And Things We Said Today. And this record was this artist's signature song. It was the first record to be at #1 on both sides, in both the UK and the US, since Kathy's Clown. And it's Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison from 1964, and Yo Te Amo Maria on the other side. My favourite Roy Orbison record there. Little Red Rooster by the Rolling Stones from 1964 with Off the Hook. And this was number one for a week in December of 64 before it was overtaken by the Beatles and I Feel Fine in December of 64. And this was the Christmas number one for 1964 because it was number one from December of 64 until the January of 1965. So it was number one over the Christmas period of 1964. And She's a Woman on the B-side. 1965, number one, the Rolling Stones, The Last Time, and Play With Fire. This is number one of 65. The Beatles with Ticket to Ride. This was number one in 1965 as well, with Yes It Is. Some of these may be in the wrong order, but I'm just going to show you in whatever order, the year order. Might not know all the dates, but just started to make this video kind of last minute, really. 1965, number one, Elvis Presley with Crying in the Chapel, and number one for 2 weeks in June and July of 1965 with I Believe in the Man in the Sky, which was from his Hand in Mine LP a few years earlier. Help, number one in August of 1965, just before the release of the film, with I'm Down. The Rolling Stones, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, with Aspiring and Flying, number one in 1965. 1965 seems to be a big year for the Stones. Quite a lot of number ones we have from them. Get Off My Cloud, 1965. And the other side has The Singer, Not the Song on Decca. And then We Can Work It Out and Day Tripper. This was a double A side for the Beatles. And this was the Christmas number one from 1965 because it was number one from like December of 65 until January of 1966. So this was the Beatles' Christmas number one. They seem to get Christmas number one for the last sort of 3 years, 63, 64 and 65. So yeah, nothing will surprise you about the Beatles. This was number one in June of 1966. Frank Sinatra, Strangers in the Night, a really great song on reprise with My Kind of Town on the other side. And then that was number one for 2 weeks before being overtaken at the end of June 1965 with Paperback Writer by the Beatles. And in fact, Strangers in the Night stopped Paperback Writer originally getting number one, and then Paperback Writer overtook Strangers in the Night from number one at the end of June and in July of 1966. So there's Paperback Writer, 1966, with Rain on the other side. The Beatles' second number one of 66, Yellow Submarine, and Eleanor Rigby on the side, so a double A side. This came out the same day as the Beatles' Revolver album. Last number one of 66 and kind of number one 67 as well. I'm a Believer by the Monkees and I'm Not Your Stepping Stone on the B-side. Now this is a double A side as well, and this record actually got in the way of Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane getting number one. And it's Release Me by Engelbert Humperdinck from 1967 with 10 guitars on the other side. Both great songs. Then in July, the summer of 67, All You Need Is Love by the Beatles was number one, as was, and the B-side is Baby You're a Rich Man. Now this one is kind of a double A side as well. This was the Christmas number one for 60, well I don't think it was the Christmas number, but it was number one around the December period of 67. Hello Goodbye, and the B-side has I Am a Walrus. I think this might have been a double A side, not sure, but cool to have this one as well. Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World on the HMV label. This came out in 67, but it wasn't in the charts number one until the following year, 1968. And it's got Cabaret on the other side. The Beatles and Lady Madonna, 1968. This was a number one in 1968. And The Inner Light. And that's the last Beatles number one on Parlophone. And the last single on Parlophone they would make until the 70s. Hey Jude, their 1968 number one and their first number one on Apple with Revolution. 1969, Get Back. This was the last of the Beatles. I think one of the last of the Beatles' number ones in the UK. May have been the last. I don't know. But Don't Let Me Down on the other side on Apple. Great song. I don't have the Ballad of John and Yoko. I'm not sure if that was a number one. It may have been. I don't know. But I'll need to kind of look at the chart facts again and kind of refresh in the memory a bit. Honky Tonk Women, a number one in July of 1969 with You Can't Always Get What You Want. And this was the last number one the Rolling Stones would have in the UK of the 60s. But I don't know if they had any number ones in the 80s and 70s, 80s and beyond. I'll need to look at it again because I don't have every 45 by some of these artists. Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, the number one of 1970. and Keep the Customer Satisfied, both songs from the Bridge Over Troubled Water album on CBS. Just a fantastic record. Elvis Presley, my last Elvis Presley number one that I have. This is The Wonder of You, number one for a few weeks in July and August of 1970. And Mama Like the Roses. My Sweet Lord by George Harrison, 1971, number one. The first Beatle to have a UK solo number one was this one, My Sweet Lord by George Harrison, on Apple with What Is Life, both from the All Things Must Pass album. Bit early to show this next record, I know, but it was the Christmas number one for 1973. Slade, Merry Christmas Everybody on Polydor, and Don't Blame Me, Polydor. Don't have any number ones of 1974, unfortunately. None of those singles I have from 74 managed to make number one. That was only albums. I'm kind of thinking of, I might do a video of my number one albums as well as the singles, but that'll probably be a long multi-part video, but we'll get to that anyway. Art Garfunkel, I Only Have Eyes for You on CBS, number one in 1975, and Looking for the Right One, a beautiful B-side, that one. Billy Connolly, Divorce. Yes, believe it or not, this comedy record actually made number one, and from a Scottish comedian as well, with Cuckoo. Billy Connolly, he's a very famous and well-known comedian throughout the UK. He's been very well known here in Scotland, but throughout the rest of the UK, he's very much loved and well known throughout, and even the world. Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, the Christmas number one of 1975, because it was the number one between November of 75, and then it was number one until the January of 1976. So it was the Christmas number one from 1975, and it would get number one again on another occasion. We'll touch on that later on. And the B-side of that is I'm in Love with My Car on EMI. Elton John and Kiki Dee with Don't Go Breaking My Heart, Elton's first UK number one. And Snow Queen on the B-side. This is on Elton's Rocket record label. Pretty much an iconic song there, one that everybody knows. This was the biggest selling non-charity single in the UK, and it was a number one in 1977. Paul McCartney and Wings, My Love Kintyre, a great song. And Girls' School on the other side, this is 1977. Strange, I don't have that many Paul McCartney. I have quite a few Paul McCartney singles, but quite a lot of them weren't number one. Yes, a lot of number one albums, but some of his singles never really made the number one spot for some reason, but it's good to have. This is on Capitol. 1979, number one, Art Garfunkel, Bright Eyes. And an unknown artist with Keharstein. Don't know what that's all about, but Bright Eyes is a great song. Now on to the 80s, and December 1980 is a time of music which many of us, all of us pretty much don't want to remember. The 8th of December, John Lennon was shot dead outside his New York home. He had just come back from a 5-year hiatus period when raising his son Sean. He just released a Double Fantasy album, and the single on that one was Just Like Starting Over. And as a result of John's murder, both Double Fantasy and this made number one. This was number one for 1 week in December of 1980, just after John's tragic murder, and Kiss 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 by Yoko on the other side. But then it was overtaken by the, I think it was the Winifred Gospel Choir with There's No One Quite Like Grandma. Sometimes the charts do some really questionable things, don't they? But anyway, Just Like Starting Over was number one in December of 1980 after John's murder. And then in the January of 1981, this had been released as a single before, but it made number one because of the occasion. Imagine, John Lennon. This was released as a single in 1975. It was an album in 1971. And it was released as a single in 75 to promote the Shave Fish compilation. But then with John's murder in December of 1980, this song got to number one in the January of 1981. And it's got Working Class here on the B-side. An iconic song, Imagine. It's a great song. And the last of the John Lennon number ones is Woman, also from Double Fantasy. This, I think, was also number one in the January of 1981. So John had 3 UK posthumous number ones in like the December of 1980 into the January of 1981. And Beautiful Boys by Yoko on the other side on Geffen Records, like that, Starting Over. Michael Jackson, One Day in Your Life on the Tamla Motown label. Now, this I think had been recorded in 1975, but it was re-released as a single in the UK in 81, and it was number one there. So with Take Me Back on the other side. Queen with David Bowie and Under Pressure. This is from 1981. This was kind of released just before the Greatest Hits album in the November of 81, so quite a big single. And it was also on their Hot Space album as well. And Soul Brother on the other side. Under Pressure's a great song though. I haven't heard that B-side though. Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder, Ebony and Ivory. This was number 1 in 1982 with Rain Clouds on the other side on Parlophone. Billie Jean, Michael Jackson, a number 1 in 1983 from the Thriller album. And It's the Falling in Love on the other side on Epic Records. Paul McCartney, Pipes of Peace. I think this was the Christmas number 1 for 1983. Backed with So Bad on the other side on Parlophone. Next up, one of my all-time favourite records, 80s records. Foreigner, I Want to Know What Love Is. This was number 1 in the January of 1985, but it had been released in 1984, but it was the number 1 in January of 1985 until about the February of that year. And it was number 1 for quite a while, I think. Back with Street Thunder on the other side on Atlantic. Just a great record. I actually went to see Foreigner live this year at the Hydro and they were brilliant live. Got a few more 7 inches to show, and then we've got some CD singles to get through as well. Michael Jackson, duet with Sida Garrett, I Just Can't Stop Loving You from 1987. Back to the Baby Be Mine on the Epic label. One of the first singles I owned, I think. Oh, needs a bit of kind of taping or kind of sticking, I don't know. But it's nice to have this one. Michael Jackson from 1987. I Just Can't Stop Loving You. Don't have a lot of Michael Jackson. I have quite a lot of Michael Jackson 45s, but I don't think I have a lot of number 1 45s. It kind of depends on what side of the world you're on when you have the CD Michael Jackson number 1s. I'll need to kind of look at that again. Elton John, Sacrifice, his first UK solo number 1. Quite hard to believe that this was his first UK solo number 1. It was released in 1989 on the album Sleeping with the Past, and then it was released as a single, and then a DJ called Steve Wright had heard the song and he began playing it on his Radio 1 show, and so Elton got his first UK number 1 as a result of that in the June and July of 1990. And it's got Healing Hands on the other side, so a double A side. Yeah, really great song. And then in 1991, in the November of 1991, Freddie Mercury, the lead singer of Queen, had died with AIDS, and that was a big loss for music. And as a result of that, one of the records we just shown, Bohemian Rhapsody, was released again with a different song on the B-side, These Are the Days of Our Lives, and it was the Christmas number 1 of 1991, because it was the number 1 in December of 1991 until the January of 1992, and it was released as kind of proceeds to the Terence Higgins Trust Fund, and it's on Parlophone. So yeah, I've got both the original release from 1975 and then the re-release in 1991. So yeah, quite a one that you see quite a lot, this single. And the last 7-inch I have, I need to take this out the plastic sleeve, is Freddie Mercury, Living on My Own. This was a posthumous number 1 in 1993 on Parlophone. And the B-side is the radio mix. This is a jukebox single, which is why it's quite hard to see, but you can see it if you like hold it to a light, so it'll be easier to see it that way. Right, now the CD singles, and we've got quite a few to show. Michael Jackson, You Are Not Alone, a number 1 in 1995. And I know some people thinking, well, why are you showing Michael Jackson? He's a blah 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 blah. Well, I know that. I know all the kind of controversy that surrounded his whole life and career, but nonetheless, he sold a lot of records and had quite a lot of number 1s in his lifetime and career. So you kind of have to acknowledge that he's a part of kind of pop music history, even if he did something pretty bad. But nonetheless, it's still a lot of good music. 1995 CD single. Now, some people are going to question me for owning this, but it's Elton John, Something About the Way You Look Tonight, and Candle in the Wind 1997. Now this is probably one of the biggest selling singles of all time in 1997. I don't want to go into like the background on it, but I think everybody kind of knows the story and background behind this version, because Princess Diana, who was a good friend of Elton John's, was tragically killed in a car crash, and Elton was very kind of shook up and shocked by the news. And he then wrote this song and performed it at her funeral, and about a week later it was released as a single. But then it got a bit out of hand because people were just kind of buying like loads of copies. I think maybe on the day it's released, loads of people bought copies, and it sold like loads of copies on its first day first week of release, I think. And it's now classed as the biggest selling single of all time. So it's a good time for a collector's purpose. I don't play it that often, but it's kind of for my Elton John collection, really. My Sweet Lord, George Harrison. This is the 2002 re-release that they put out after George died. They released My Sweet Lord with Let It Down and My Sweet Lord, the 2000 version, and it was the #1 in 2002. I should say the other songs, but there's also one on the Elton John one called You Can Make History Young Again. But the Michael Jackson one has like quite a lot of remixes and stuff like that, which it doesn't do me. Kind of for collector's purposes, I'm not really keen on remixes all that much. But this one's actually quite a good neck one. Elvis versus JLX, A Little Less Conversation. This was released in 2002. I think to kind of promote the 13 #1 hit CD, and it was also used in the World Cup advert, the Nike football ad in 2002. It's got the JLX radio edit remix, which is like 6 minutes. The Elvis and JLX, sorry, the original version, which is the radio edit, 3 minutes, and then the 6-minute 12-inch version, and then the original version of A Little Less Conversation, which was used in the film Live a Little, Love a Little in 1968. And it's actually quite good. I actually quite like both the original and the remix of this one. One that I used to play quite often, actually. Last #1 I have is from 2003, and it's Elton John, Are You Ready for Love? This he recorded in 1979, but it went nowhere, and then a remix version of it came out in 2003, and it went to #1 in the September of 2003, and it's a good song. I really like it. It's probably my favourite Elton John songs. So that's all my UK #1 singles I have in my collection. I plan to do a video on my UK #1 albums, which may take a while, but it's just something I want to do to acknowledge the kind of history of the charts and kind of how long it's been going, because it's been going since 1952, and there's been a lot of great releases over the years from that. So like, comment, subscribe. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more content, click the subscribe button below, and there'll be probably a review coming soon of Bruce Springsteen's new album, Only the Strong Survive, which I know is a soul covers album, but I kind of want to review it on the channel, and there'll be plenty more album reviews I would like to do on the channel as well. So like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more content, and we'll see you for the next video.